membership organization that leads creation network with decision makers. The Vancouver Island Economic Alliance is all about achieving a vital and sustainable island region economy. We collaborate with stakeholders to solve problems and promote opportunities. Every October, VAIA hosts the State of the Island Economic Summit, a meeting place for ideas where you can network with decision makers and be informed of relevant grassroots trends in the island economy. VAIA's annual economic report is the only publication of its kind in Canada. It is user-friendly and puts important, timely data at your fingertips. Foreign Trade Zone Vancouver Island provides ready access to Canada's duty and tax deferral opportunities and attracts foreign direct investment to the island region. And the Island Good brand, created by VAIA, makes it easy for shoppers to find local products and is proven to increase sales for island producers. If it's Island Good, whether it's potatoes or gin or mattresses, it's good for our economy, good for sustainability, and good for us all. VAIA, a nonprofit membership organization that leads creation of transformative economic opportunities.
Good morning, everybody, and welcome to day 5 of Seaweed Days. I don't know about you, but my energy is still up after that amazing 2-day workshop at the Shaw Centre for the Salish Sea in our Sydney Aquarium. Thanks, everybody, for joining us from all over the world today and making time out of your busy schedules. This day is really important. It really is about the essence of the Seaweed Days Festival, as our 2 industry speakers talk about sequestering carbon and how important that is in saving our planet, saving our species. My name is Erin, and I'm the Manager of Communications and Engagement at Cascadia Seaweed, the presenting sponsor of Seaweed Days. And I would really like to thank Diana, who is behind the scenes from VAIA. VAIA is the Vancouver Island Economic Alliance, who you just learned a little bit more about, and they are helping us deliver the whole speaker series, the industry speaker series during Seaweed Days. So thank you to Diana and the team at VAIA. And to enlighten us about sequestering gigatons of carbon is Howard Gunstock today from Carbon Kapture. So I'm going to tell you a little bit more about Howard, then he's going to come on and take it away. Oh, I should tell you, because we've got so many people on today, we'll ask that you keep your mics muted and your cameras off, but if you have any questions throughout the presentation, just pop them in the chat box and we'll get to as many as we can at the end of Howard's presentation. All right, a little bit about Howard. Howard is the co-founder and Chief Kelper at Carbon Kapture. He's spent 15 years working in some of the biggest companies around the world. He's a sustainability entrepreneur. He specializes in thought leadership and is obsessed with psychology. He played an integral part in multi-billion-pound transformational behavior change programs. Leading and inspiring, motivating others, he brings these skills into his work at Carbon Kapture, and we're so grateful to have him with us today. Welcome, Howard.
Hi, Erin. Thank you so much for a really great introduction there. Thank you. It's really great to be here. Thank you. So I guess I can get on, right? Yeah. Okay. Let's do this. I'm just gonna load up my screen and share my screen with you guys. Okay. Just double checking. Can we all see my screen? Is that all good?
Perfect.
Thank you so much. Okay. So how can seaweed stop selective attention blindness to climate change? And what can we do to start healing our oceans by removing gigatons of CO2? When I started to write this speech, it reminded me that sometimes it's really, really hard to get people to think differently about a topic. For that to happen, there has to be something that happens to stop the run and maintain program that runs in our heads, right? There we go, runs in our heads. You know, the ones that get you to the car and you end up at work on a Saturday morning, or worse, when you end up at the kids' school, not the client meeting. Most decisions undertaken by adults are down to repeated habits, and the psychology of habits and decision making, as Erin pointed out in my introduction, is something that's always fascinated me throughout my career. So to help set the scene for this talk, I wanted to tell you about Daniel Simons. He discovered sustained inattentional blindness. Now, you may have seen this video before, but it's about 20 years ago, and Simons put this video together with two teams playing basketball. I'm just going to pause it there for a second. So two teams playing basketball. Now, there's a team in white shirts and there's a team in black shirts. The team in white fill most of the teams fill most of the screen, and each team have their own ball. And your job, as the video will suggest, is just to count the amount of times the team in white pass the ball. You see, what fascinates me isn't the fact that you counted about 15 passes. What fascinates me is the fact that up to 50% of people that watch that video didn't see the gorilla come right in front of the screen, beat his chest, and then walk off. This is selective inattentional blindness, and it's the reason, you know, that so many things happen. In business, it manifests in numerous ways. It's the reason why staff suggestion schemes work so well. Our staff see things that are so obvious to all and sundry, except us senior managers. We are so focused on dealing with the ambiguity of our roles, we don't see something that's literally right in front of our faces. And I'm not just referring to the climate crisis directly here, but I'm sure you can see the links. Now, trees. I love trees. 100% the greatest natural carbon store on land. Plant them in your gardens, plant them in your own locations, plant all the local varieties of trees that are native to where you are. They won't just improve the climate, but they'll have a positive effect on your mental well-being. Green does that to the brain. But here's where selective attentional blindness comes into play. In this space here, there are 8 billion people, 8 billion cattle, not forgetting all of our cities, our infrastructure. It's incredible. Even NASA, they tell us that if we planted trees in all the landmass in all of the world, we won't remove the CO2 that we've created this year. In fact, we'd only probably be able to remove around about 25% of that, the emissions. So just to give you in context what that actually means, humans, we emit between 30 to 40 billion tons of CO2 per year. So if we took a land mass the size of, say, the United States, okay, that would be roughly about 1.7 billion trees. We would only be able to remove the emissions for about 10% of what we created that year. It's a helpful start, unquestionably, but it's not sustainable. The United Nations say we have 10 years to save the ecology of our planet. Planting trees takes 10 years before they can become effective at capturing carbon. Seaweed is 30 times more effective at capturing CO2. And if you want to look at the opportunity cost, the difference between the bottom line and the top line, that's staggering. That's our 10 years. That's what we're talking about here. When you look at the sequestering ability of trees over seaweed, over that 10-year event horizon, there really isn't any debate. So in the fight to save our ecology, seaweed is the better solution. How do we get people to invest in seaweed over trees in the fight for climate change? Well, it comes down to two key points. First, how do we lower barriers to entry for seaweed farming? And two, how good are we at getting people to pay for their carbon impact now rather than 10 years time when the trees start to mature? So this picture here is a view of all of the available places that we can farm seaweed right now. Eminent authorities on seaweed capturing, such as Oceans 2050 and other authorities that talk about the absorption rate of carbon in real granular detail. They've shared that there's around about 250,000, 250,000 hectares of seaweed farms in our oceans right now. Okay, in context, there's roughly 12.2 billion hectares of land and ocean on our planet. So excuse my crude maths, 70% of that 12.2 billion is 8.5 billion. And if 30% of the oceans we can't turn into that are not suitable for seaweed farming, that still leaves a meager 6 billion hectares of ocean where we can grow seaweed if we wanted to. Okay, so what are the key challenges? Well, clearly it's getting warmer. By creating seaweed and kelp farms, we need to be able to manage that. As seaweed farmers, we are in effect geoengineers of our local waterways. This is a fast-track solution of capturing CO2. And while seaweed is in the water, it's in effect a dispersed battery store of captured carbon. It's brilliant. But the challenge comes when we need to measure our footprint of harvesting, process, and the onward selling of our products. Ocean temperature changes have brought about rises in temperature across the world. So why is this an issue? Well, cold weather and cold water encourages growth, the growth rate of kelp, but it's not great for drying seaweed. It's too cold. And hot weather is great for drying, but it's not great for the growing. So how do you solve that? Well, there are a couple of key solutions. One is the ability to offshore, so we can get to the colder waters quicker. The other is the development of low carbon intensive processing, which allows us to dry without using more carbon than we've extracted from our oceans. This is a net gain for our planet. Carbon Kapture are currently working to address both of these issues. Okay. So let me just explain to you what this is. So the graph on the left, this is where we are if nothing changes. So by the way, this information, this is data modeling by MIT. I can't claim this either, as mine either. But all the information on this has been thoroughly modeled by MIT. So the graph on the left, and that shows that we're on course for a 3.6 degree increase in temperature by 2021. That's completely unsustainable for human life. And the graph on the left shows us what happens if we tax carbon, if we put a higher rate of cost on the cost of carbon. It is the single biggest lever that we can pull. So a few months ago, Carbon Capture tested out this thing called ocean carer bonds. Now, ocean carer bonds were a way of placing a higher value on the regenerative nature of seaweed. These were, in effect, advanced sales for seaweed or kelp that we wouldn't be able to put in the water or harvest for at least 12 months. We charged £100 for a quarter of a tonne of what we classified as rebalanced CO2. Not a carbon credit. This was just a test. It was a test to see if people got it, it was about putting a higher value on the regenerative value, power of nature. We sold out in 20 days. Now, just imagine scaling that up. Well, we can. We need to encourage the removal of red tape on licensing of seaweed farms. Politics is about doing and meeting the needs of the people. We need to find ways to help people interact with the topic, of climate change. There's enough people interested in growing seaweed. But at the moment, as a great example, in Europe, we source 90% of our seaweed from Asia. That's not impossible to change. Of course, there are financial barriers. Creating seaweed and kelp farms is not cheap. But what if you could make the barrier to entry more achievable? What if you could make it more cost effective? Well, to do that, you need to have a different business model, something that's in a non-standard format. Now, coming from a supply chain background, I hate waste. It's costly and it makes profit margins smaller. As mentioned earlier, as seaweed farmers, we are in effect geoengineers of our local waters. So this is a fast-track solution of capturing carbon, as well as growing a nutrient-rich biomass. With a combination of effective education and increasing the variety of ways that people can interact with the topic and the industry, and getting a fair bit of support, we can make some real impact. Carbon Capture are keen to work collaboratively with other seaweed farmers who have the same sort of view on the environment as us. We plan to offer payments to seaweed farmers outside of the farming cycle. Now, that's certainly a way of increasing our network and scale of operation. So what do I mean by non-standard business models of business? Because I get that a lot. Well, Carbon Capture's practical solutions are designed to help everyone engage with climate crisis. So we range everything from educational programs for children, recognition awards for businesses, investment models, the rebalanced carbon that I mentioned earlier, and branded products and services, as well as job creation and environmental services. The more we create ways for people to engage with the topic, the more likely we are to make meaningful change. So how do we do that? Well, we like to create opportunities to help people talk, like this one, the Kelper Save the Planetathon, which is a virtual event we're running on the 5th of July. Our objective isn't to reinvent the wheel. It's to evolve existing ideas so that our solutions has more than one purpose. Nothing changes unless we can make seaweed accessible. After all, no one in life really likes a surprise. The smart move in the climate change debate is how do we move the dial without dramatically changing lifestyles straight away? Sure, we can ramp it up and make it bigger later, but but it's like telling someone who doesn't exercise to go and run a marathon tomorrow. It's just not going to happen. I know effective change happens when everyone knows what their role is and what they have to do. Change needs to be practical and participative. So, point of how we get to gigatons of CO2. So going back to our 250,000 hectares of seaweed, if we work on standard analysis, that each hectare gathers around about 15 tons of CO2 per hectare. That's around about 3.7 million tons of CO2 that we're capturing already. We would need 266 times more hectares of seaweed to get there. So that really is a significantly big step. It also shows us that it's more than possible to achieve when we go back to the size of the amount of oceans that's there to be able to grow seaweed farms. A lot of things needs to change to make that happen. I'm going to go back to sort of the ocean carer bonds idea here. So if we go back to that and the price of carbon, we found education and engagement informed our consumers to make decisions about being okay with paying a higher price on carbon. Far higher than the floor levels of carbon credit that are around at the moment. People think just capturing CO2 is enough, and it's not. I think that part is the reason why so many people invest in trees. They think it's a silver bullet solution, but it's something, and it's something that they can engage with. But it doesn't address all of our consumption behaviors or really value the net effect. By helping people understand the dual benefits of seaweed and CO2 removal, that's really important. It's not just about selling products and services. It's helping people understand the net benefit, not just the CO2 removal, but the reduction of ocean acidity, increase in marine life, the effect on of organic nutrient-rich biomass over petrochemical alternatives that can be used, and then using the betterment of ecology and human development. So if we capture all of that together, then that's how we can use seaweed to stop selective attention blindness, climate change. Thank you. Oh, sorry, I had a couple of pieces there. Sorry. Erin mentioned to me, if people who don't, who want to sort of engage in the topic and just taking some sensitive steps, what books would I suggest to read? So actually, I really scratched my head on this, but actually the 3 books that I would suggest you read are Who Moved My Cheese, which is about dealing with change, or Iceberg is Melting, which ironically is about an iceberg melting, and also how you deal with groupthink and deal with practical change, and Sapiens, which is essentially a brief history of humanity, decision making, and how we've got to this stage in the first place. So I think that's it. Yes, that is it. Okay.
Well done, Howard. Thank you so much. That was a lot of information in a very short amount of time. So
Okay.
we do have some great questions. I think that will allow you to dive a little deeper into some of those things you touched on in your presentation. But first of all, Howard, could you describe a little bit about who Carbon Kapture is, who's behind it, what do you do, and who your customers are?
Sure. So Carbon Kapture are a group of business problem solvers that really are there to sort of like address the climate change needs. I've actually got a really nice little 2-line summary. I wonder if I can find that. One sec. Here we go. Let me just see. Yeah, so essentially what we do is we grow seaweed at scale. We have seaweed. We're having seaweed farms around the UK at the moment, and then what we do is we will turn that seaweed into carbon negative products and services, such as compost, such as animal feed, such as fertilizer. Really quite straightforward ways where we are about removing CO2 from one location where it's dangerous for the ecology and ecosystems, and moving it to another location where it can do better for humanity, really.
So do you actually install the farms, Howard? Does your team install the farms, or do you contract with other people in the coastal communities in the UK to do that farming?
Yeah, so we do contracting with coastal communities as well. So we make sure that we work with local subject matter experts to be able to do that, and that's an effective way of making sure that we keep local jobs with local people as well.
Yes. So am I right in saying that you're a bit of a connector between those farmers and then folks that can turn it into a finished product?
Yeah, so we cannibalize a couple of parts of the supply chain, so that relationship as well, and then also the trying to facilitate the change in between from when you farm seaweed or kelp, and then quite a lot of that drying process is quite carbon intensive, to finding ways to sort of lower the practical emissions on turning that into a useful product. So we do a little bit of both on that stage, yeah.
Excellent. Colleen is asking if you can reiterate the conversation of seaweed versus forestry in sequestering carbon.
Sure. So Absolutely. First off, trees are still amazing and always will be. Um, but the speed of growth from sapling to a effective tree, it will capture, it will absorb carbon for sure. But as an effective source, it needs to be a fully matured tree. And that takes up to 10 years. And when we plant trees, they are saplings. They won't be absorbing very much. They can store, but then also the issue is that because of the fact that there are cycles in nature, the absorption of CO2 in leaves, for example, just most of it in the early stages just stays around and then goes back in the atmosphere. The capturing of the CO2 as an effective solution in seaweed pretty much happens in a cycle, so nine to 12 months, and and I hope that sort of covers that part. So we believe that in the same time, as long as we've been effective at processing our kelp, we have got a net gain.
It's a great follow or a great lead up to the conversation that'll take place this afternoon with Megan from Oceans 2050. Cascadia was participating in that sequestering carbon seaweed study globally with Oceans 2050, and we're in search of that number, how much carbon is actually sequestered by kelp farming. And I look forward to Megan speaking to more about that this afternoon. So along that line, we have a question from Bill. What drives seaweed carbon sequestration? Is it algal mass or growth rates or something else?
So there are a number of different drivers for that. So it depends where seaweed is growing. So there's invasive species of seaweed like sargassum and algae blooms that happen, and their growth rates are driven by runoff from farmlands. And quite a lot of the time, heat temperatures in wider oceans increases the algae blooms for certain types of invasive species. Typically, though, colder waters for kelp make sure the growth rate increases, and also the flow of nutrients in the water as well, and the species. So there are a number of different moving parts in that we have to look out for.
Yes, I imagine a lot of it has to do with the mass, and that's why so many folks are cultivating larger kelps, because they grow so quickly and they slough off, and that slough is storing carbon as it sinks to the ocean bed and creates all those additional habitats and ocean benefits.
Yeah, it's fantastic. I mean, there's some really great stuff that happens just when the kelp sort of grows and then breaks off and then floats down to the bottom. It creates, that's a great sequestration process. But there's also a really big difference between capturing and sequestering as well. So trees, as a great example, trees great at capturing, but the sequestering really only happens really in the bark, and when you turn it into something else. Quite a lot of the excess of the stuff, the trees, like the branches and stuff, they're left to rot. The main bit that you use to sequester is actually the bark and probably the center of the tree, and everything else is fairly useless in that process. At least we know with seaweed, it's the whole biomass, it's everything. So that's a really cool advantage for us as well.
You talked a little bit about regulations and how the red tape needs to be released for this industry to scale up. Have you identified any areas around the world, any jurisdictions that have found success in this?
So there's varying degrees of what we classify as success. So I've seen some really great stuff happening over in the Philippines, or I've definitely heard about a lot of really success happening over in the Philippines, and where it's mainly sort of seaweed on a rope. But in the Western world, there's such a there's not enough knowledge within government policy to be able to understand what's happening. What do I mean by that? So quite rightly, governments and ministers are wanting to make sure that when you apply for a seaweed farm, that it doesn't destroy the local ecology and the waterways and the surrounding areas. Quite right. But there's a misalignment of thinking that seaweed farms and certain, for example, offshore salmon farms as one that sort of springs to mind, and the issues about contamination and how we actually manage the process so they coexist is not clear within government. So clearly the answer is, if I don't know, I will say no, because I don't want to damage more. So the proof of being able to layer that effectively needs to be based around, okay, so as a great example of this, right? We've got two locations that we want on our seaweed farms. The first location is Southwest Wales, around about Carmarthen Bay. So that's been a really slow process to be able to get through, because there is a lot of ecology around there. However, there's also a site in the North Sea. The North Sea is going to be so easy to get our application through, because legacy industries such as oil and gas and trawler fish happening in that coastal way has destroyed everything. There's nothing to save there. There's very little marine life. Now, it would be a massive success to be able to put kelp farms back in there and seaweed farm, and it grows because it's really cold there. It will grow really, really quickly, and it will be a massive success to be able to bring back some marine life back into the North Sea, and that will be a very different conversation with the licensing authorities. So I don't think it's the success around the country; it's knowing the geography and where things have been really damaged to a point where you can't break anymore, that it's to be able to bring something back in. You got to use the smart money, you got to use the geoengineering to be able to try to bring back life, because where kelp grows and seaweed grows, marine life flourishes. Effectively, the UK, we have these things called garden cities, which are cities outside major conurbations that were put there to encourage people to move there, so they can have affordable living and transport to the major cities. In effect, they are sort of the kelp forests we put outside in the sea are garden cities in the sea for marine life. They will, you'll put it out there and marine life will turn up and it will flourish, and that's what we need to encourage.
Definitely. We had an interesting presentation from both the British Columbia provincial government and the Canadian federal government during our Seaweed Farming 101 workshop over the last 2 days. And it really highlighted how much work we have to do as advocates in this sector to growing this sector on British Columbia's coastline, in bringing along the politicians, inspiring them with all of the hope that cultivating seaweed brings with it. So, as much as we see it as a challenge, it's also a huge opportunity, just sharing that story and communicating how many boxes it checks, which is, I see it as an opportunity.
It's massive. The education of the general public on what's actually happening and going on around them is the biggest opportunity we have, unquestionably.
And the purpose of Seaweed Days.
Absolutely, and what a great purpose. What a great purpose it is, and fantastic to see so many people on this call. Wow, thank you everyone for jumping on the call. It's very kind.
There's a couple of other questions, Howard, that I think we might be able to get through here. I'm going to read this one out, okay? This one's from Brian. Brian, if you're listening, pop it into the chat if I've misunderstood. Do you think that the ocean carrier bond can be a model for a carbon credit, which can be purchased by the public and other industry, which can in turn fund seaweed industry development to offset future carbon emissions?
Oh, that is a good question. Okay, so there's two answers to that. I think the ocean carrier bonds is a step. Right? Let's not muddy the water. It's a step in the right direction. If we can prove to politicians and to industry that people are actually prepared to put a higher price on CO2 removal, then actually that's a niche in a market that didn't exist before. So that's one. It's a bit like how when organic food first came to market, in the supermarkets, it was significantly more expensive. And I don't say that should come down as well, because the price of extracting carbon should be high. However, if you can eke out that market, that gives rise to what will be, you've got Megan speaking from Oceans 2050. Those guys are working on validating carbon credits. So I don't think we're talking about a very long period of time. What we want to be able to try to do, though, is expand the idea of not just a carbon credit in the ocean. We want to talk about the life cycle product of a credit, right? So the downstream services, once we've harvested it and farmed it, because there's a difference between capturing it and then having to harvest it, because then you lose something in that processing and farming procedure, and we have to know exactly how much that is. But then the net benefit of using the organic over the petrochemical, and then the benefit of whatever it does further downstream, whether it encourages sort of crop growth, where it reduces methane gases in animals, as the easier ones that we know about, right? There's a value in that. There's a value in for a farmer to be able to say, hey, I've used an organic, nutrient-rich biomass for my cattle. The welfare of my animals has increased because they're not eating this petrochemical alternative. So there's something in that, and that's something that I think that when we get past the blue credit topic, and it's a big topic, right? There's no question about it, and there's a lot of ins and outs on that. And I don't particularly want to go to a stage where that's something that we're doing specifically. But if we can show there's a higher value on everything around ecosystem services and that downstream approach, there's another opportunity for us to be able to do some really good stuff there. That, I think, is a market that we should definitely be thinking about exploring.
The more I learn about seaweed, the more this circle image comes to mind. You know, this whole circular economy, circular environment. It all seems to work so well in harmony together. And again, like you mentioned, it's about communicating that story to everyone. You know, making more seaweed enthusiasts.
Yeah, no, but I also think actually it's just it's a case of thinking differently and engaging our brains. You know, we take resources as humans. We take resources far too flippantly, far too. It becomes a nothing. And actually, when we think about it, actually, what we've really got to get better at doing is being more effective with the resources. It's not that we don't have them; we just got to use them in a more effective way. That's really what we're trying to do.
Mm-hmm. There's a follow-up question from Brian. Is seaweed turned into human food still considered, it says carbon sequestered, and sequestered is in brackets. I suppose, is that a net benefit, a net gain?
Sadly not. It goes into, once it goes into the human food supply and food chain, it happens with food, right? What happens with food happens with food. But the idea of turning there is a limited amount in that we've removed it out of the sea and then we've processed it in a low carbon intensive way. But I think that's a really difficult point to prove, and certainly not an easy win fight. What we have to do in this industry is take the really obvious wins and then build on those to make those bigger, and then go for the slightly more difficult crop of fruits, etc., to be able to build an economy from. There will be, you know, there are lots of things that we can do.
We've heard from lots of people that are just interested in growing seaweed for the purpose of sequestering carbon as well.
Yeah, and I don't know exactly how I feel about that. You know, when you're talking about huge volumes of biomass and then just being dumped in the bottom of the ocean, I'm not sure what that does. When you grow seaweed like just on a farm, you will lose, say, 5 to 10% of that. Okay, fine, and that drifts and that can go anywhere in a current. But when you're talking about dump of volumes, we don't know, and that's one of the tougher things for us to work out as in humanity. It really is, whether that's actually a safe bet or whether that could do more damage than it does good.
So Howard, you talked about that you have 2 applications or 2 sites that you've identified that you'd like to have farms in. Do you have current farms in the water right now?
Oh, they're coming in October. So
Oh,
those start in October, which is really super exciting. And yeah, that's one of the reasons why we're doing the Kelpathon as a part of a fundraiser, also an awareness campaign. Really fascinating stuff. And actually, again, part of our ethos as a company is having transparency about what we're trying to do and where we are at each stage, and we make it an engaged journey for all of our Kelper followers. I can see a couple of them on this call right now, so that's fantastic. Thanks, guys. Yeah, so
tell,
that's really cool.
tell us some more about the plantathon on July 5th and how individuals can sign up and learn more.
Sure. Thank you very much. Yeah, it's good that we can do a little plug. So the Kelper Save the Planet-a-thon was it's an idea that we had a little while ago. So when we started off as a business, one of the first things we identified was that we're in a really good space for, as far as recruitment was concerned. People were often started off, they started giving us their time, and then the real interesting stuff happened. Graduates, postgraduates, doctorates started to send into our inbox all of their research. And they're like, would you like our research on this topic of CO2 and carbon and this, whatever it was? There was loads. And within a few months, I think we had something in the region of about 100 to 150 years worth of academic research condensed down into abstracts, because I don't do lots of heavy reading all the time. It's just a lot. And we were saying we've got to find a way of paying these people back. We've definitely got to find a way to be able to say thank you. So the Kelper Save the Planet-a-thon actually is part of that. We've got a number of problems that we want to try and sort of just think out in a think tank stroke hackathon type way. And what we'll do is we'll use this forum to showcase the best graduates that we can find. So we're looking for around about 25 graduates in ecology, biology, sustainability, business sustainability, anything of that in that part. And we've got a couple of questions we want them to solve. We know the answers to the questions. The likelihood is they'll come up with a couple of nice ideas that we can bolt onto what we're already doing. But what will really happen, what we're really looking for, is to see the soft skills that these graduates have, to show how they work with others, to show how they present. And this is really an advertisement for them. So what we're encouraging is then, from my network and actually via other networks as well, but of people who are HR directors, will say, look, come have a look at this. Come have a look at these students. It's a free opportunity for you. And if you're looking for graduates in these areas, these are the best ones that we could find. And that's a free piece for you. So I think that it solves a problem for us. It gives graduates who are studying something that they are passionate about an opportunity to get a job in an industry that they would really like to be in, rather than some of the things that we have to choose when we come out of university because we can't get the jobs that we want to get. And especially in this environment post-COVID, I think it's a really good thing to be able to do. Yeah, so it's a win-win-win for everyone, the graduates, us, the employers. Yeah, we thought that's a really cool thing to do, and we'll probably run those maybe quarterly, and we'll see what problems we can find as well.
And how can we learn more about it, Howard?
So we go live on Monday with it, which is why this is just like really, I promise you, it wasn't planned. It just happened to be, that's the timeline. Yeah. So we go live with it on our socials on Monday. We've got links into various universities, and essentially what you'll do is you'll find one of our posts, share it with whoever you can do, click on the link, fill in the application stuff. We've got some documentation to be able to do to sort of ask you some questions to find out about your interests. And then next time we will be looking for we're doing some interviews. Sorry, I was looking at the question box that came up there. Thank you very much for popping that in. But yeah, we'll be doing that as of Monday from our social media platforms.
Wonderful. Our host Kennedy is just plunking your handles in the chat there. And Howard, I think this is a great place to wrap up. I think you've done a wonderful job opening our minds to seaweed and how it can help sequester carbon for our planet and for our species. I'd like to thank you so much for joining us in the evening where you are in the UK.
It is.
Yes.
I'll be tuning in to listen to the presentation on Oceans 2050 from Megan in a bit.
I
So
will.
that's really cool. I'm really excited about that.
Great.
She's very, very good speaker. Really good. I'm glad I went on before her, like as the warm-up act. Yeah, that's cool.
Great.
And I'd just like to thank everybody for being on the call today. That's just incredible. Thank you so much. Yeah, really, really grateful for you giving us some of your time today, this morning as well.
Yeah, I
Thank you.
second that. And thanks to Vaia for hosting the industry speaker series during Seaweed Days. So folks, you've got an extra 10 minutes. Check out those links in the chat and go learn more about carbon capture in this extra 10 minutes of time we are allowing you today. Thank you, everybody. We'll see you at the next session. Bye, Howard.
Thanks.